Hey everybody, it's Lon.TV. We're doing an update from my video I did last week about the Wyze cameras and the removal of a lot of the free features that a lot of us have come to like on them. And what we're going to focus on today is RTSP functionality. Now, if you're not familiar with RTSP, it is a standard that security cameras use to send their videos to a networked DVR. And we've got the Synology NAS that we reviewed last week on the table as well, because Synology has a security DVR application that you can download for free through their package center. And basically what it allows you to do is run your own security surveillance system on your local network with hardware that you have direct control over. And for many years, there was an RTSP firmware that you could install on Wyze cameras so that you could use them with a security system on your network. But they've since removed that firmware from their website, and they're not supporting it on any of their newer cameras. But there is a way to actually continue using this feature without having to update the firmware on your camera. And I found out about this the other day thanks to Reagan Kelly, who tutored me on Mastodon about a project that allows you to set up a bridge using Docker to add back in the RTSP functionality. And I've been playing around with it a little bit, and I was able to get the new Wyze Campaign version 3 to send its video out over a standard format on my network using the bridge that I installed on a Synology NAS. And in this video, what we're going to look at is the process of setting it up via Docker using the Synology NAS, and we'll be integrating one of these cameras with the Synology surveillance station. And what we're going to do here actually will work in other platforms as well, because it's all standards-based. So you could install this Docker container, for example, on something other than a Synology, like even a Raspberry Pi. But in this video, I thought it might be helpful for those of you who have a Synology NAS, or maybe thinking about playing around with Docker and want to find a fun project to get started with. I think this one is a great one to get started with to learn some of the concepts of Docker. And Synology has a pretty helpful graphical user interface around their Docker system that I think is a great way to learn how Docker works. And once you get the concepts down, you can start branching out and doing more advanced things with Docker via the command line or some of the other Docker applications that are out there for managing your containers. But we're going to start simple today and get this bridge working here with one of these cameras and this Synology NAS using mostly graphical tools here. So this is going to be a fun thing that I don't think is going to take all that long and should be very easy for you to do at home as well. But before we get into this, I do want to let you know, in the interest of full disclosure, that the Wyze camera here that we're going to be playing with came in free of charge from Wyze, and the Synology NAS here came in free of charge from Synology. However, neither company is paying for this review. No one is reviewing or approving what you're about to see before it was uploaded, and all the opinions you're about to hear are my own. And I should also note that Synology is an occasional sponsor here on the channel. I often produce tutorial videos for them, but again, they are not sponsoring this video. So let's get into it now and see how we can get this Docker container to bridge our Wyze cameras to a standard format. Now, for more information, you can head over to the Docker Wyze Bridge GitHub page where this project lives. This is open source. It is updated frequently. And towards the end of the video, I'll show you how to run the updates on your Docker installation on the Synology. Now, if we look here, at the moment, it looks like this supports most of the Wyze cameras out there. However, the new OG cam that we just got in the other day does not appear to be one of them. Now, I do have a Wyze Cam OG Tower of Power here, and I will try to get my OG camera working, but it looks like at the time I'm recording this video, it's not one of the supported cameras. However, the new PanCam V3 is. So we'll play around and see what we can get going here. Now, in order for this to work, your cameras need to be on the same network that your Synology NAS is on. So if you have them connecting maybe to a guest network to isolate things, you're going to need to get maybe one of your network legs from your Synology onto that guest network, because in my testing, if the camera was on my IoT network, I couldn't access it from my main network based on how all of this works. Now, on the Synology, there are two packages you're going to want to install. The first is Docker, which you'll find in the package center. You can see I've got it installed already. The other one, if you want to use the Synology as your DVR, is Surveillance Station, if I can spell it correctly here. And this is a free application that you can also get on the Synology Package Center. My understanding on these models, the home office models like this one, is that you get 2 cameras that you can connect to surveillance station as part of your purchase. But additional cameras will require that you buy a license. And different Synology NAS devices have different numbers of included licenses. But I think for the most part, the Synology NAS you have is likely going to have 2 available. Another thing to note is that this is a Plus Series NAS. I don't believe that Docker is available on some of the lower-end Synology NAS devices. So if your Synology is a Plus Series like this one with an Intel or an AMD processor, you should have Docker available. And if your Synology doesn't have Docker available as an application, Docker does run on just about anything that runs Linux. So even a Raspberry Pi here should be sufficient for getting a couple of cameras up and running on your network. So let's get this container installed. And what we're going to do here is go to our Synology application list and pull up Docker. And as you can see here, we've got nothing going on right now, but of course we don't have a lot of RAM on this system, so we'll see how much of a memory impact this will have. I think we're going to be okay. Now what I'm going to do is go to the registry, and I'm going to search for Wyze Bridge. And what we want to look for is this one here, MRLT8/Wyze Bridge. That is the container that we want. And I'm going to click on download. And what this is going to do is download the latest version of this Docker container to our NAS so that we can spin it up. And this will take a minute or 2 to download depending on your available bandwidth. So we're going to let this download, and when it's done, we'll get the container set up and operating. So our download is complete. As you can see here, this package is about 208 megabytes in size. I'm going to click on Launch Now. I'm going to leave Bridge here for the networking type, and I'm going to click Next. Now, I'm just going to leave it as the default name here, but you can call this whatever you want here because the container name is what you give it. I'm going to leave these 2 options here unchecked, so we'll give the container the ability to use as much resources as it needs, and we also don't need to have this running with high privileges. One thing you might want to enable is auto restart, just in case something crashes. You can have it restart itself if it ever shuts down. If we go over here to advanced settings, we do have to add 2 environment variables because these don't get added automatically. And this is one of the issues you run into when you're using Synology to configure your Docker containers. So if we were on the command line, what we would be doing right now is just typing in all of these commands, and when we were done, it would basically just spin up. But because we are using the Synology interface, there's a couple of extra things to add. But again, I think once you figure this stuff out, the command line makes more sense. So for me, this was how I got a better handle on Docker. Now, there are 2 environment variables here in the command that the container needs. You can see they are labeled here with a -E. The first is your Wyze email address that you have on your account, and the second is your Wyze password, because this does have to connect to Wyze and authenticate. So you're going to be really careful here about, first of all, people looking over your shoulder as you're putting your password in, because it's going to be put in the clear. But you also want to make sure that people don't have access to administrative privileges on your Synology NAS where they could see the password. This does work, as you'll see in a few minutes, with multi-factor authentication. So you will be able to continue using your 2-factor authentication. But without logging into your Wyze account, this is not going to work. Now, I just clicked the Add button here, and what I'm going to do is basically just type in my Wyze email in this field, and I'm also going to add another field here for Wyze password, and here is where I'm going to put my Wyze password in. So what I'm going to do now is put my email address and password in, and then I'm going to click on Save, and when I do that, we'll pick it up and show you what the next step is. So we clicked on Save, and now we're going to click Next with those settings in place. And now we're going to be asked about our port settings. And once again, we're going to look at the command that you would normally type in on the command line to figure out what ports we're going to map here. So as I move my window over, you can see there are 4 different ports: 1935, 8554, 8888, and 5000. Now, 5000 on Synology is also the port that you use for getting into the NAS in the first place. So we're going to have to change that. But what I'm going to do here is set my local port to 1935 for the first set, And basically what we're going to do is have this mirror what we have in the command line up until we get to the part about the web interface. So we're going to go 8888 here and 888 there. And basically what's happening here is that any traffic that comes on port 1935 to my Synology's network address, it's going to pass into the container on port 1935. It's very much like how you would map ports on a router that you're connecting to the internet. Now here what I'm going to do is change the local port from 5000 to 5080, but I'm going to map it to port 5000 inside the container. So when a data packet comes to this over port 5080, the Synology will see that and send it into the container on port 5000 so we can get access to the web-based control panel that the Docker container uses. So now that we've entered those and verified that they're correct, we're going to click on Next now, and we'll see what happens next. Now this next setting here we're not going to need for this container because this involves mapping your Synology storage to storage needs that the container might have. And because this container doesn't store any data, it just passes it through, we're not going to need to set up anything here. But maybe when we do a future video, we'll have a container that might need some local storage that we have to map out. So we're going to click on Next now. And now we're going to basically get a rundown of all the different things that we configured. And because I'm confident everything is good, I'm going to click on Done here, and then the container will start running once the configuration process is complete. So now you can see the Synology is going to be chewing on that for a little bit. And when we go over to container here, we can get a status of what's going on. And you can see now that it is currently running. Now, one of the nice things about containers is that these are not virtual machines. They are basically sharing resources that are already installed and running on the NAS. So when you spin up these containers, even though they kind of work in an isolated manner like a virtual machine might, they don't require anywhere near the resources. So you can see right now as this is sitting idle, we're only using about 60 megabytes of RAM and barely any CPU. So the next step we have to do is configure the bridge itself. So what we're going to do is connect to the bridge over that port that we just mapped and get our cameras connected up so we can start using them in other places. All right, so what we're going to do here is go back to our web browser. Now you can see that I am currently connected to my Synology NAS on 192.168.2.254 port 5000. Now I'm going to create a new tab here, and instead of using port 5000, we're going to use port 5080. And when I do that, as you can see, we're going to a different page. And it is asking me right now for my two-factor authentication from my Wyze account because it does need to log into Wyze. So let me put that two-factor code in and I'll show you what you get next. All right, so we are up and running here using the container. And as you can see, we've got two images here. The backyard window camera here is a WyzeCam V3 running on stock firmware. And then this is my WyzeCam Pan version 3, which is on the desk here, which is also running with the stock firmware. And as you can see, we've got still images coming out of both of them. Now, by default, what the container will do is update these images every 30 seconds. But if I scroll down here, I can switch over to video. And if I click play here, I can get video feeds from both here simultaneously, as you can see. And this is just playing through my web browser over WebRTC, but I'll show you how we can use this in other places in a minute. Now you're going to notice I have a few other cameras showing up here that are not working. These two cameras here I have on my account, but the cameras aren't currently plugged in, which is why they're dark. And then this one is my garage Wyze outdoor camera, which unfortunately is malfunctioning at the moment. But I'm talking about it here because if mine wasn't malfunctioning, you can actually turn that battery-powered camera into an RTSP camera. And if you're running with their solar panel product or have some other power source on it, you should be able to use it as an RTSP camera and expand its functionality beyond just basic notifications. So you see here you do have a good amount of flexibility to this. Now underneath each of these images are three links. You'll see an HLS, an RTMP, and an RTSP. And based on what software you're using, you will use either HLS, RTMP, or RTSP to connect a camera to it. So for example, what I'm going to do real quick here is just grab this link for RTMP on my Wyze pan camera here. And I'm going to load up VLC and go into Open Network. And what I'm going to do here is just paste in the link that I copied from that RTMP link there. And as you can see, what it's doing is connecting to my NAS on port 1935, which was one of the ports that we set up to map into the container. And the Wyze pan version 3 is identified by its name. And if I click on Open here, it'll take a second. But what's going to happen is VLC is going to connect now to, there it is, to that camera. We do have a little bit of a delay here because we are feeding video from the camera into the NAS and then out to VLC here. But as you can see, the frame rate looks pretty solid. I could even run this through my vMix software that I use to produce the show and actually bring it in as a video source because it is just a standard network streaming protocol. So pretty cool stuff here. But now let's take these two cameras that we have accessible to us and add them to the Synology surveillance station. All right, so we'll jump back into our Synology's control panel, and what I'm going to do is go over now to surveillance station that I installed earlier from the package center. Now right now I don't have any cameras attached, but I'm going to click on IP camera, and what this will do is guide me through adding a camera to the mix. Now it can search my network to see if it can find cameras. I'm going to let this run for a second. I don't think it's going to detect those cameras because that Docker container is isolated from the rest of my Synology NAS here, but I am, just for the heck of it, going to let that run its course here and see if it sees anything. And if it doesn't, what we'll do is add the cameras manually and then get them both ingested into our surveillance station. All right, as expected, it did not find the camera. So what we're going to do is click on Add Manually. And what I'm going to do first for brand is just select User Define. There is a Wyze option in here, but that is assuming that you have their old RTSP firmware, which is no longer really supported by Wyze. So we're going to do it this way. So right now I've got it on User Define. I'm going to call this one PanCam. And what I'm going to do to get that address is jump back over to the Docker container page. And I'm going to right-click on RTSP here and click on Copy Link Address. And what I'm going to do is just paste that in here. And I do need to get rid of that RTSP there, so to start basically at the IP address. But as you can see here, we've got things formatted just like you would have them formatted for VLC. And we're going to click on Add. And I'm going to add a second one here, again, repeating the process for the other camera. So this time we're going to grab the link from the backyard window. I'm going to copy that link address. And we're going to call this backyard window. We're going to go back to User Define again. And I'm going to paste in that address and just get rid of that RTSP there because it's assuming that's in there already. And I'm going to click on Add for that. And now I'm going to click on Next. And as you can see here, it's already connecting to them and getting imagery, it appears. And we have them both mapping to the surveillance storage that I set up when I configured Surveillance Station here. And I'm just going to do a quick setup just to show you how this works. And so what's going to happen here, it's going to take a second to process everything. And by default, what it's going to do is have these cameras continually send video to the NAS where it gets recorded using Synology's system. But the Wyze stuff is still also going to work because these cameras have to be connected to the Wyze servers as well. So you really do get the best of both worlds here in that you can have your Synology device here working as a DVR, but also still have some of the functionality you might like from the Wyze cameras. Now right now we've got both cameras here feeding video back to my Synology so we can get a live view of both. I can also scrub these back in time to see earlier portions of what the Synology has recorded. And of note, my Wyze pan here has an SD card installed, so it is still recording locally onto the camera while also sending the video live to the Synology NAS here. And it's also still working with the Wyze cloud services. So I'm able to do everything here without needing to install another firmware. One thing to note though on the Wyze pan is that you can't control its pan and tilt from Synology. You have to do that on your phone. But there are some features of this camera that allow it to kind of follow a patrol route. So what you'll see in my review of this camera is that I have these waypoints baked in that the camera can follow on a regular basis. That might mess up the Synology's motion detection, but you could just have it recording all of its movements as it goes throughout the day here, and have those recordings, of course, make their way into the Synology NAS. But all in, I think this is a pretty good solution. And you don't just have to use Synology here. Basically anything that can take an RTMP, an RTSP, or an HLS is going to work with this Docker container. And from a resource perspective, this doesn't seem to eat up all that much. As you can see here on our Docker control panel, we're using about 1.18% of the CPU, maybe 3% now, and about 220 megabytes of memory. So pretty low footprint here, at least for two cameras. And right now what I'm doing is previewing both of the cameras we have set up, in addition to having that data recorded onto the NAS. So you might want to make sure you've got enough RAM on your Synology to do all the things you want it to do, but this activity is not eating up all that much, and it's not doing any transcoding of the video in this instance either, so it's all pretty low impact. Now, they are constantly updating the bridge software here. As you can see, just in the last week, there's been 4 different updates, minor updates here, but they're happening nonetheless. So when there is an update available and there's a feature that you want to add, the process of updating it on the Synology is pretty easy, but a little different than what you might be used to from an app update standpoint. So what you need to do is go over to the registry, and you want to re-download the image here. And if you select latest, this is always going to grab the latest version. So we're going to select that. And that download process that we did at the beginning here is going to happen again. And once it's downloaded, what you need to do is stop the container that you have running. So we're going to click on stop here. And once it's stopped, what we're going to do, and this almost looks counterintuitive, but this is actually how you do it. You select the container while it's stopped and go over to reset. And what this will do is basically keep all of your settings, but now use the latest version of the Docker container that you just downloaded. And then you just turn it back on here and you have done an update. Now, I did notice when I updated my copy just now, I did have to put my 2-factor code back in again. So just be prepared to double check and make sure that it's all working again by going to the web-based control panel for the container. But there you go. You've got a pretty quick and easy way to add RTSP functionality to most of the Wyze cams. As I mentioned, the OG cameras, which just came out, don't seem to support this just yet. There's some uncertainty as to whether or not they will. So again, we'll come back and update this video if they do get that functional. But in the meantime, though, there are plenty of Wyze cameras available now that you probably already have that will work with this feature. And it's something that I think might provide a lot of value to a product you've been using for a while. And you don't, again, just have to use Synology Surveillance Station. There's a bunch of other options out there, all of which support RTSP, HLS, or RTMP, that will allow you to have a lot more flexibility as to how you use these very inexpensive Wyze cameras while still having the benefit of using their app and cloud services. That's going to do it for now. Until next time, this is Lon.TV. Thanks for watching.
This channel is brought to you by the Lon.TV supporters, including gold level supporters Brian Parker, Chris Allegretta, Hot Sauce and Video Games, Logic KGR, Tom Albrecht, and Amda Brown. If you want to help the channel, you can by contributing as little as $1 a month. Head over to lon.tv/support to learn more. And don't forget to subscribe. Visit Lon.TV/S.